Okay, great. So welcome everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. I see we have people from all different countries, which is great to see. For those who don't know me, I'm Yael Shapira, Olam's Director of Network Engagement and Programs, based in Washington, D.C. And I am really grateful that you're here with us today. I know for a lot of us, it's been a really tough couple of months, and our headspace has not been, it's been with what's going on in Israel and Gaza and around the world. And unfortunately, even when really tough things are happening, we are still dealing with the climate crisis. It's not going to stop, and it's something that's important to continue talking about and working towards. So I'm really excited for today's webinar around climate resilience and adaptation of local communities. And hopefully we can all, in whatever capacity we work with communities around the world or with our own communities, we can continue making or taking steps towards supporting the climate and the world. So before we start with our presentation, I just wanted to share, for those who are new to Aspire and new to Olam, really quickly about the Aspire Ethical Practices Program. So Aspire offers Olam's partners and members, and also others in our network, various resources. So one is that we have created ethical best practices spectrums. These are spectrums that allow you to see where you stand in different topics. So we have 5 topics. We have ethical communications, ethical monitoring and evaluation, ethical community engagement, and ethical climate practices, and ethical volunteering, global volunteering. So there's these spectrums with 10 commandments, so 10 key things you should be thinking about when wanting to do ethical work in international development, humanitarian aid, and global service. So there's going to be a link in the chat. Please check out those spectrums, particularly the one around climate, which is relevant today. We also offer our partner organizations micro grants that could be used towards building more ethical practices in the organization. So it could be used to bring in a trainer, to bring in someone to review your ethical codes of conduct and your website or anything else. We have various resources. We're not here to reinvent the wheel. There's so much out there around ethical practices. So feel free to check out on our website different guidelines and webinars and tools and various things that are out there. And finally, we have recordings of our previous workshops from the last year and a half, including this webinar, which will be added in the next few days. So if you missed anything, if you want to see what we've already done and which experts we have brought in, feel free to check out our workshops on the website. So today, we're really touching on our ethical climate practices spectrum tool, particularly around 2 commandments. And I'll share those 2, which are very similar to the work that CARE is doing, and our speaker works with CARE. So you'll see some overlap. So 2 of the things that we were thinking about and we're going to focus on today is around planning scenarios and preparing for the future when you work with communities. So it's really around thinking about what can happen and what could we do now to create communities that are more resilient to the shifts of the climate crisis. And it shows here some ideas of what it looks like to be a leading organization. So feel free to read this and also check out the whole spectrum in the link. And then also another commandment that we have, which is around providing responsible and flexible funding that will really help communities adapt and be more resilient to climate change. So with that, I am very thrilled to invite Obed Koringo, our speaker and presenter for today. Obed works with CARE Denmark as the climate policy advisor and has many years working in the climate field around policy and implementation. I'm really thrilled that he's joining us today from the United Arab Emirates, from COP28, the UN climate conference. So he's been very, very busy just presenting and being in different sessions at COP28, and we're really grateful that he made the time to be here. And when he's not in Dubai, he lives in Nairobi, Kenya. So I'm going to pass it on to Obed. We're going to have a presentation. Then we're going to have some time for Q&A, and then we'll have a little activity where we and you can think about how your own community is facing climate risks and how you could take some of the tools that were discussed to adapt to your own community setting. So with that, I will pass it along to Obed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yael. Let me share my screen.
I'll just say that we'll be sharing this PowerPoint and various resources in an email to you, so you don't have to write everything down right now.
I hope you can see my screen.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much. As Yael has rightly put it, my name is Obed Koringo. I work with CARE as a climate policy from a negotiation room in the UAE. I'm lucky that I got an empty room. Basically, we are attending COP28, as you all know, or may all know, and this is the 28th meeting of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which is happening here. And probably if I can give a quick overview of what is happening here, I'm sure you've heard that the COP, on the first day of the COP, the parties adopted a loss and damage fund. And we are happy that this fund is going to go a long way in supporting communities, especially those who are in the front line of climate disasters, to be able to address losses and damages. We also have other, of course, we've seen pledges being promised by the countries, and we, of course, our hope is whether, or our worry is whether these pledges are going to be realized. Another issue, of course, is around adaptation and issues of finance, which are being discussed here. We have just completed the first week of the negotiations. Tomorrow is a free day, and starting Friday, we'll start the second week of negotiations, where we'll have high-level delegates coming in to be able to finalize some of the unfinished business, especially around finance and adaptation, which are actually giving us problems in the negotiation rooms. Besides that, we have stakeholders from across the board, civil society organizations. We have, organizations representing different groups who are doing side events and actions out there to be able to amplify the call for climate justice. So I'm happy to be here with you, and thank you for giving me time to be able to talk to you. I mostly deal with global policy, so I might tend to go to the policy angle. So please alert me if I do that, but I'll try as much as possible to stick to the topic of the discussion. So thank you so much. So I'll talk about adaptation and resilience. And I have, I'll start timing myself now. This is the outline of my presentation. Okay, so we will look at the current state of climate. We will introduce various terminologies, understand the, of course, try to understand the community-based adaptation and locally led adaptation. We'll look at issues around gender and climate change adaptation and the role of advocacy, which is really, really important. And of course, look at some of the climate resilience tools and approaches that we are using as CARE that we think are important for organizations like yours to use, especially when you're working with communities. Now, I will try to, so in terms of the state of climate, it's very evident right now that, of course, since the pre-industrial level, the pre-industrial before countries started industrializing, we have the global warming now has increased to 1.1 degrees Celsius averagely. And this is as a result of the global or the greenhouse gas concentration in the atmosphere, which of course has caused climate change and the global warming. And through this, we've seen various disasters, slow onset disasters, such as droughts, increasing temperatures, the monsoon dynamics. We've seen also increase in extreme weather events such as typhoons, cyclones, heat waves, which have really caused a lot of havoc. And according to the synthesis report, countries are still not yet on track in terms of achieving the Paris Agreement goal of limiting the global warming or global temperatures by 2 degrees Celsius and working towards limiting this to 1.5 degrees Celsius. So it's really, really worrying. And today, I mean, this COP, we are doing a global stock take. And the global stock take basically is looking at how far we are in sort of achieving the goals that we put under the Paris Agreement, like a temperature goal, adaptation goal, and also finance goal. So we expect that this COP is going to come up with the ambitious outcomes and targets to be able to address that. So in terms of so when you talk about climate change, of course, it really threatens the human rights of those who have contributed the least to climate change. And coming from Africa, or one of the continents that's heavily affected by climate change, it's safe to say that, of course, climate change is really likely to add an additional 132 million people into poverty by 2030. And one of the worrying facts is the fact that those who are the least emitters, those who have least caused this problem, are the ones who are highly impacted. And we've seen losses and damages in terms of hundreds of billions. The recent adaptation gap report really gives us very worrying figures in terms of the adaptation gap, to an extent of saying that, of course, adaptation funding has reduced by 15%. So this means that we are not able to address or deal with these disasters as they come in a more meaningful, especially communities that are already at the front line of those disasters. And because this money is very small and it may not be able to reach those who need it at the local level, especially women and girls. Now, this now brings me to the terminologies. When we talk about adaptation, when we talk about climate change, we talk about strategies on how this climate change can be addressed. It can either be addressed through adaptation or mitigation. And when we talk about adaptation, we're talking about adjustments in human or systems or response or natural response in terms of reducing the adverse impacts or take advantages of those opportunities. So basically, you acknowledge that climate change has already happened. How can we adjust the systems? How can we adjust and to be able to cope with the already changing climate? And of course, with the next slide, we'll see some of the ways we can adapt. But the adaptation can either be structural or physical, institutional, or social. And it also can be anticipatory, of course, which takes place before the changes. Can be autonomous, where you cannot do anything. And then, of course, due to ecological systems, adaptation just takes place on its own. And when we talk about anticipatory, we're talking about things like early warning systems, DRR, or disaster risk reduction. Then, of course, adaptation can also be planned, where we are able to develop policies or plans like national adaptation plans, which are able to help countries be able to adapt. So when we talk about structural, we are talking about options that are discrete with clear outputs, of course, such as physical, like engineering or building walls, ecosystem-based adaptation, service options. And it can also be social. By social, of course, we're talking about creating awareness, especially in the communities, for those of us who work with communities. When we raise awareness, when we do extension, we do community meetings, we do early warning systems, and ensure that climate information reaches those who need it at the local level. That's part of social adaptation, behavioral, and of course, livelihood diversification, whereby if a community was predominantly pastoral community, and now you start doing other alternative livelihoods like crop growing or or chicken rearing. That's of course part of adaptation, which is social. Adaptation can also be institutional, where of course we talk about economic instruments such as taxes, subsidies, or insurance arrangements that are able to cushion communities that are already affected, social policies and regulations, and of course policy making and adaptation planning and ensuring that there are relevant institutions that are able to take care or to address some of these issues, including implementing the relevant policies. Of course, financing, which is the elephant in the room. I'm just from our session where we are talking about local-led adaptation. And what we're talking about is where is the finance and how can this finance actually reach those who need it the most at the local level. So probably this is a question, because of time, I won't be able to open the floor, but I would like to, just in the chat, can you tell me whether this is an adaptation or a mitigation strategy in terms of improved waste management? What do you think? If you can just post your answer in the chat. Okay, mitigation. Mitigation. That's good. So you are both right. Can either be adaptation or mitigation depending on how you're looking at it. And in the next slides, we talk about options that are mitigation options that are, but also have adaptation co-benefits. And this is one of those, the issues of improved waste management. Of course, we know that waste is also one of the main contributors of the greenhouse gases, but also it helps. Waste management also helps us to be able to adapt or improve resilience. For instance, waste causes diseases, even look at from the health issue in the first place. So it depends on how you look at it, but it's good to say that there are options that are both adaptation and mitigation, but also have co-benefits of both mitigation and adaptation, and this is one of those. Improved cook stops. What do you think? Is it an adaptation or mitigation mechanism? Adaptation. Okay. Adaptation. Yeah, thank you for that. And someone from Uganda said, in my village, people burn rubbish. Yeah, even me, where I come from, my local area in Kisii, Kenya. I mean, so this is also another option that has both. It helps us to reduce the carbon dioxide concentration by reducing the amount of trees or forests that we cut, but also helps to enhance the resilience of communities. So it's both adaptation and mitigation. Yeah. So same as this is also another, adaptation and mitigation, both. But of course, forests or trees are predominantly known as carbon sinks. But at the end of the day, they also helps us to be able to enhance the resilience, because forests are, the water towers, they protect rivers, they protect our waters, and of course, that's one of the ways in which they can be able to enhance our resilience. And these are some of the things that we have talked about. I do not want to go deeper into this, but just to mention that both adaptation and mitigation are both actions or mechanisms under which we can deal with climate change. But you can have a mitigation action that has both adaptation co-benefits. And we find that, for instance, if I can give an example of one of the policies that countries are required to come up with, especially under the Paris Agreement, the NDCs, or nationally determined contributions, we find that those have initially they're supposed to have mitigation actions. But in Africa, or the countries, especially from the South, say that adaptation is very important for them, and they ensure that they include adaptation actions. And when you look at their actions, some of them have options that have actually adaptation mitigation action that have adaptation co-benefits. So which is really, really important, especially for communities. But again, it's very important to understand that there can also be maladaptation. And maladaptation basically means that you can have an intervention, you want to sort of address an issue, vulnerability at the community level, but through your intervention, then you cause more harm. Or you cause, it's an intervention that will result in the increase of vulnerability of another location sector, for instance. Let's say if you plant trees in an area that is predominantly prone to forest fires or natural fires, then once these forest fires come, when they are burnt, the trees are burnt, and it means that they are able to emit more carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. So yeah, and when you talk about maladaptation, is an action that might eventually lead to more harm and unintended harm. And it's good when we plan properly and do our analysis properly to be able to implement actions that probably may not be able to lead into maladaptation. And this is one of the areas that even the IPCC that I've talked about, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the issues of maladaptation, which is quite predominant. Now, let's go to climate resilience. I hope I haven't lost you up to that point. And I can see Yael smiling, so I believe I'm doing well. So when we talk about resilience, we're talking about the ability of a social or ecological system to be able to absorb disturbances while retaining the basic structure and ways of functioning. And so how are we able to bounce back or absorb the disturbances, especially when caused by climate change, climate stresses? And how are we able to bounce back? How are we able to withstand the shocks and stresses? When we're able to withstand, when we're able to bounce back, it means we are resilient. And so basically, it's also defined as a capacity strengthening process to be able to enhance the ability of individual to anticipate, organize for, and adapt to climate change. So when you're talking about anticipating, you're talking about, for instance, doing early warning systems, for instance, climate information, being able to plan for, then organizing for. This basically can also mean planning, developing plans, coming up with strategies to be able to address the challenges or the stresses and shocks that come as a result of climate change, and of course being able to adapt is actually doing it and implementing those actions. So resilience is both a process and outcome that is built over time. Process is doing when we are doing it, and an outcome is when you're resilient. It's an outcome. It's really a continual process, and it's also context specific, and we'll be able to see that as time goes by. So this is basically CARE's resilience approach, and we believe that for us to be resilient, or for communities to be resilient, they need to have increased capacities and assets to deal with the shocks, stresses, and uncertainty. So they need those assets. Assets can be cash, can be physical assets, can be money, can be, can be in the form of capacity, even the technical capacity, and awareness that they need to be able to deal with those uncertainties. So, and if the drivers of risks are able to be reduced, and ensure that there is enabling environment. And by enabling environment, it also means there's a relevant policy environment to be able to accommodate this. It leads to increased resilience. Just on the terminologies, we'll just quickly define this community-based adaptation. It's basically a community-led process that focuses on community priorities, needs, knowledge, and capacities, of course, which empower people to plan and cope with the impacts of climate change. So it's a community-led process. And when we talk about locally led solutions are those where communities are at the front lines, take lead in identifying, planning for, and implementing and monitoring adaptation actions, and not just participating. So it's very important when we talk about locally led, is communities are in the front line. They're from the design of, for instance, of programs of solutions, how they are part and parcel of the process. So even when we develop solutions, programs on the ground that we think are going to address the challenges of the community, how do we ensure that those communities are part and parcel of the process in terms of designing, planning, and implementing, and even in monitoring the implementation of those actions to see if they have been able to address those challenges. And of course, when we talk about ecosystem-based adaptation, the use of biodiversity and ecosystem service as part of overall adaptation strategy. So this is very important. So these are just quickly to run through the key principles, and I'm happy to say that CARE is one of the signatories of the principles of locally led adaptation, and this is what we are currently championing for. And we'll talk about, it has 8 principles, basically devolving decision making to the lowest appropriate level, ensuring that, of course, communities are part and parcel of the decision making, and collaborative action in investment, ensuring transparency and accountability, including how resources are used in a transparent and accountable manner, flexible programming, and learning. Of course, we want to move from a situation whereby our programming is donor driven and we have to do programs as the donor wants, but how flexible are we to accommodate the changes and context in which we are working? Investing local capabilities to live institutional agency, addressing structural inequalities, especially when we talk about women, youth, children, disabled and displaced people. How are they engaged in part and parcel of the process, including gender issues? Yeah, so I do not want to go deeper into that, but I think when we talk about the principles of local led adaptation, it has to reflect all these key principles. And it's good that even when you are doing your programming, you ensure that you have this at the back of your mind, because gone are the days whereby now, we think we know what the communities want, but we need to do this with them and engage them in whatever we do, because they have the solutions, they have the knowledge, and we need to acknowledge that. So yeah, so basically this is what I've just said, and I do not want to go deeper. So we have traditional community consultation, which really communities are just invited, and they are just largely viewed as beneficiaries, and they don't have tangible power to decide who and what is funded. When we talk about this participatory community-based and participatory approaches, whereby community leaders may be invited and may be able to direct some of the funding, but funding might go through one or more intermediaries, for instance, like CARE, for instance, which gets money and takes it down to the communities. But when you talk about locally led, local actors decide what is implemented, by how and by whom. They're in the center of deciding, and local knowledge is highly present, and funding is managed by local actors. So yeah, if you can see the arrow talking about local agency and leadership is increasing as time goes by. Yeah, so with that, I believe I do not have to talk about what is CBA again, because I think I've delved deeper into that. And this is basically a framework, a CARE framework on community-based adaptation. Of course, when we talk about community-based adaptation, you're talking about addressing underlying causes of vulnerability. First of all, understanding what are the key vulnerabilities by doing a vulnerability assessment, understanding those vulnerabilities, and being able to undertake disaster risk reduction after identifying the disasters, the impending disasters, coming up with strategies to be able to reduce those disasters. Then it's also about climate resilient livelihoods, and basically when we talk about the climate resilient livelihoods, really is about the ability of the people to be able to withstand, adapt to, and of course recover the climate-induced stress and risks, and of course sustain and improve their livelihoods. And it also talks about local and adaptive organizational capacity. How do we ensure that we are able to strengthen those capacities at the local and organizational level, both at the local level, community level, and at the organizations that work with communities? And of course, the aspect of influencing and enabling policy environment that is able to help us be able to sort of implement these actions and work in a manner that is supported by the government through policy, through plans, and both at the national and subnational level. So yeah, I think I've already said that when we talk about climate resilient livelihood, we're talking about adapting to the current climatic variability, preparing for anticipated climatic changes, environmentally sustainable, and of course contributes to a triple win, which is of course adaptation, mitigation, and sustainable development. Then yeah, this slide talks about how the climate resilient livelihoods are, of course, the how, like how do we enhance or ensure that we have those climate resilient livelihoods? Of course, some of the examples around diversification of community activities, as I mentioned, innovation, especially locally led innovations, such as conservation agriculture, access to information, risk management, which of course includes natural resource management and environmental conservation. So these are some of the ways in which we can enhance climate resilient livelihoods. When we talk about disaster risk reduction, we are talking about strategies and systems that reduce and manage impacts of increasing climate-related disasters. So it basically entails minimizing vulnerabilities of communities and disasters, and of course, identifying, assessing, and reducing risks. And of course, these are some of the examples of DRR activities that we can implement at the community level. Risk reducing actions, such as safety nets, to be able to buffer impacts such as cereal banks, fodder banks, diversification. We keep talking about diversification, which of course spreads the risks and reduces the impact, because sometimes when communities just depend on only one livelihood, and for instance, the drought comes or flooding, and right now the way it's flooding in my country, Kenya, communities are left hopeless because their main source of livelihood is eroded. So if you're able to diversify, then it spreads that risks. Then of course, being able to prepare for those risks and safe shelter, and of course planning for expected events in drought, for instance, drought-prone areas. How do you plan for expected adverse events, for instance, drought-resistant crops, for instance, keeping more camels, which are prone to, can go for long days without needing to drink water, for instance, or can withstand those harsh climatic conditions, early maturing crops, and of course, issues of early warnings systems and actions, which are really ensure that the community participates and of course are able to get that information in a more timely manner, and of course training and practices. I'm going a bit fast because I don't want to. Some of these slides are already I've mentioned. So when talking about risks and uncertainty, climate change knowledge is uncertain, and of course sometimes we need to work with the levels of risks and probabilities we need to build capacity of risk awareness and management as reducing impact. Therefore, we need to include or to focus on the DRR and livelihood, of course, to be able to reduce and spread risks, and include mechanisms, of course, such as weather-based insurance that are able to cushion. This is basically an example of a way in which we can deal with risks and uncertainties, because we do not know what is going to happen in future. So you're able to cushion farmers, for instance, or pastoralists by doing this weather-based insurances, for instance, as an example of a mechanism. And in CARE, we are part and parcel of this program called Insure Resilience, which cushions communities, especially those who are being affected by losses and damages, especially in Southern Africa. And this is one of the mechanisms that is actually being fronted and is highly supported by the government of Germany, I think, through a program called Global Shield, which a lot of money is going to go there. But of course, our main my disclaimer is it's not that we are some of these solutions, we're saying that it shouldn't really also cause burden to those who are where we are implementing some of this mechanism, like insurances, for instance, subjecting them to paying high premiums. So that in at the end of the day, it's going to be a maladaptation, as I was saying, because at the end of the day, you're trying to address a problem, but also causing another problem in terms of making them pay those big premiums through insurances. Okay, this is so yeah, there is the results. So some of the results of following the CBA approach. Communities, of course, programs, government recognize, understand different vulnerabilities. So we say that for you to undertake this CBA, you also have to understand those vulnerabilities by undertaking vulnerabilities assessments. So you need to be able to understand those vulnerabilities so that you can be able to address them properly. And of course, actors being able to participate in the planning, analysis, planning, and monitoring of resilience strategies, but of course are responsive to the local needs and result in sustainable development. And of course, adaptation being able to be integrated in development plans and policies is very, very important. Now, let's change gears. We talk about gender. Gender is really key, a very key action to consider when we are implementing adaptation projects and programs. And one of the things that we as CARE promote is doing a gender analysis to try and understand how different genders are affected before we sort of come up with strategies on how to implement gender responsive actions. And of course, some of the key gender actions, of course, as I mentioned, investing in context-specific analysis that integrates gender, developing a gender-responsive theory of change and objectives, monitoring changes in gender equality, and of course, integrating gender into the life of the project, and even gender responsive budgeting. Even when we are doing budgeting, it's really, really important to consider even when we are designing those programs. This is basically CARE's gender marker continuum. Sorry, I keep on going back because the title is up there and I'm not able to see it. So there basically shows us like I mean the trajectory in which our programs can be either gender unaware, neutral, sensitive, responsive, and transformative. And when you look at unaware, programming ignores completely the economic, social, political roles and all that. But when you talk about transformative, this is the most transformative is the highest, where policies, programs that change inequitable gender norms. And of course, not only has the ambition to transform gender, but has the resources, willingness, and capacity to institutionalize and transformative programming. And this is what we are pushing for in our programming. So, of course, once we share this slide with you, you'll be able to read through. And advocacy is really, really important in our programming. And enabling factors is really, really important when it comes to programming. And when you talk about enabling factor, we're talking about finance to be able to enhance or implement those actions on the ground. We're talking about enhanced knowledge and awareness of communities and the people that we work with. And do they know the issues that we're talking about? Are they aware? Are they informed? Do they have the power in terms of decision making? Are they able to better participate? And of course, being able to reduce those underlying causes. So this is just what I've said. Quality and quantity of funding is very, very important. We need a strong civil society organization to be able to advocate the issues and ensure that communities' issues are catered for. Even here at the COP, we have actually communities that are already here and they're able to articulate their issues. So how are we able to ensure that be able to link local to global, and the issues that are facing communities, they're able to come here and say them in the language that they understand the best. Yeah, so we can only do that, of course. We cannot do that without partnerships. Yeah, so although those community interventions are at the local level, it's very important to know that community-based adaptation demands that actions at all levels, subnational, national, regional, and global levels, in order to achieve that systemic and long-term change. So national, subnational levels or governments, local governments have a role to play. National governments, for instance, national policy and planning processes, regional and global. Here at the COP, the policies, the decisions that we are making here actually cannot make sense if they do not benefit the community that we work with. And when we talk about partnership, you're talking about working with stakeholders such as civil society organizations, private sector, and communities in order to be able to realize that. But, yeah, so I don't know how we are doing on time. Yeah.
We probably have about 10 minutes left, so we could do this quickly.
Yeah, so if you can maybe type in the chat, what are some of the challenges, for instance, you can think of when you think about implementing this community-based adaptation or local-led adaptation interventions? What are some of the challenges that come into your mind? What are some of those challenges? Just feel free to type in the chat. Very, very important. And that this is one of the issues that keeps coming. Funding.
I know we may have some shy people here, but we'd love to hear your thoughts. Please feel free to chat.
Yeah, so in the interest of time, I think we can proceed. Thank you for Yael, you have assisted them, so thank you for that. I think that's my number one point. We need to add groundwater component to our project to supplement rainwater. Very, very important. Yeah, very, very important. So I think you work with communities, you know better the challenges. But some of the challenges that we are also trying to address here is the issue of finance and accessible finance. How that finance is accessible to the communities to the local organizations like yourselves. The mechanisms that are available, especially Green Climate Fund, Adaptation Fund, they have very stringent requirements for accessing finance, and mostly it's big organizations or big multilateral organizations that are able that actually access this funding. So what we're pushing for is how these barriers or admin barriers, how can they be sort of channeled or changed to be able to allow local organizations to be able to access this funding, especially those who are at the grassroots level, because that's where the rubber meets the road. The other issue is, how do we measure progress on adaptation? How do we monitor? And this is one of the challenges that we're actually trying to deal with here by developing like a global goal on an adaptation framework that is going to enable countries to be able to develop metrics and indicators to be able to measure adaptation progress. And this is what is also, and even when you're implementing adaptation programs, it can be a challenge sometimes to measure the progress, especially in terms of adaptation actions. Someone has said that sometimes droughts can be longer, and sometimes we have limits to adaptation. When we talk about limits to adaptation, now we talk about loss and damage. And some of this, however much you adapt, it may not be able to bring communities back to where they were. And these are some of the conversation I think we need to have, especially the aspect of loss and damage EIL, which is the third pillar now in the negotiations here at the COP. So these are just in a nutshell, but we could have more. Yeah. In the interest of time, I'll just go through some of the climate resilience tools and approaches that we use as CARE that I think are very, very important for you. We have these resilience markers, and the resilience marker is a self-assessment tool that allows teams to self-assess on how well resilience has been integrated into their work. And it can be used during project design and also even during monitoring and evaluation. Then we have adaptation good practice checklist. It can be used during project design when people are developing proposals to really provide guidance on the quality, impactful, climate resilient actions or good practices when we are developing projects, adaptation projects. And it has 9 key practices that practitioners are supposed to sort of look at. Then climate vulnerability and capacity analysis, I talked about this, and it's a gender-sensitive climate analysis tool that is used to gather and analyze information on community-level vulnerabilities to be able to know how these vulnerabilities can actually be addressed through various interventions. So before you even do an intervention at the community level, you need to do this analysis to understand, identify action that be able to support communities, understand their vulnerabilities and identify those actions. And also it also informs gender prepared, informs project design, emergencies, and gender issues in terms of programming. And of course, we have adaptation planning, local adaptation planning. So we have a tool that is able to provide that clear step-by-step guidance. And on this, we also have what we call community adaptation action plans that communities are actually using on the ground that are participatory in nature. These are PSPs, participatory scenario planning, where when we talk about climate information, communities really collectively agree on, for instance, seasonal forecasts and come up with, in the same room with scientists, traditional weather forecasters, communities, civil society organizations, to be able to look at the scenarios and come up with actionable advisories and sectoral plans and communicate this to the farmers or communities to be able to anticipate. This is an advocacy tool that we'll also share with you. I think when you get this slide, we will be able to have the links to this so that you can see how these tools look like. They're very, very interesting. and can be able to help you go through all those project cycles. It's one of the adaptation tools that called the principles of joint principles for adaptation. Then there's a tool on monitoring, and this, last but not least, we have a CARE Climate Resilience Academy that has online courses that are self-paced, and it has learning journeys. I'm one of the facilitators. Actually, I'll be facilitating one of the sessions from here on climate adaptation, and also a facilitator session on. There's another journey on a learning journey on climate advocacy. Then we have different learning journeys, including CBA, CVC, community vulnerability assessments, all those. So I think and we allow, this academy allows people or partners from outside CARE to apply and take part in this. So if you want to know more, learn more, because I know this was short, you feel free to log into the CARE website and get to learn about these courses. Yeah, so because of time, probably I won't go to the case study, but once I send the slides, the colleagues may be able to read further. But basically, it talks about the planning, how we are using those approaches, or that I've already mentioned, vulnerability, CVCs, climate vulnerability and capacity analysis, and how do we able to develop climate adaptation plans and hazard maps. Yeah, all that to be able to help us come up with integrate those practices into various sectors that we are working in. So yeah, thank you so much. And sorry for running very fast. The slides were many. I had a lot to tell you, but the time was short. Thank you so much. Over to you.
Thank you, Obed. It's never enough time. Every session we offer, we could, offer a full semester worth of discussions. But thank you. That was really helpful, and the tools that CARE has are really impressive. It's amazing to see what has been done. So I'm excited to share some of those with our partners and our members, and hopefully people could take advantage. So I do know some people may have to drop at the hour in about 5 minutes, but I hope you can stay for some Q&A and a bit of a discussion. So I'd love for you to turn on your cameras now and be more present with us, and we'll open it up for some questions. Yeah, so let's, I'll open it up to you, and if at a moment, if there's time, I will also ask Obed to share a bit more from COP, just what are some of the things you hope to achieve and that you are, happy about or concerned about at COP28. But first I'll open it up to all of you. Feel free to unmute yourself and ask.
Yeah, maybe I can see there was a question on
Well, there's a question, just how can you get more information on the CARE Academy session? I'm happy to send the link in the email in the next few days, so you can access it.
The link has all those climate, the courses that we offer. And yes, it's a paid one, but we subsidize to local organizations. But I think it's a worth investment. It's not a lot. It's basically to facilitate, especially the development of those materials, packages, and the time that the trainers, of course, the facilitators take to do the job. Yeah, so feel free to check out and see what interests you, because I think it's very, very important.
And I'm sorry, just a follow-up question to that. I work for an organization that really focuses on gender equality. And so I'm wondering if the sessions, just because it's organized by CARE, do the sessions focus on the gender component of climate resilience?
The trainings?
Yeah.
Yeah, we have, of course, CARE actually integrates gender in everything that we do. So be it programming or resilience, we have to do it in a very gender responsive manner. So gender has to be integrated in every discussion that we have. So it's part and parcel of those conversations, but we have a gender specific course, so which you can also be logged into and get insights on. So we have gender specific, but everything that if you saw my interventions on what I was saying, I made sure that gender aspect is part and parcel of that. Even in our frameworks and our approaches, they're all gender sensitive or gender responsive. Yeah. So, but there's a specific course on gender, which you can also benefit from. About the COP, if I may.
Sure. Let me just give another opportunity if anyone does want to first ask a question or see how it's relevant to your own work and your own communities. Laura?
Hi, yeah, thank you for your presentation. I wondered if you have any advice, toolkits, trainings you could recommend on climate resilient livelihoods, particularly on like M&E when you're working with farmers that might not be literate, because that's one thing that we I work on like climate resilient livelihoods, and it's one thing we kind of struggle with. So yeah, if you or Care has any insights, that would be very helpful.
Yes, we have the CBA, the climate community-based adaptation or the adaptation learning journey. We have two main learning journeys: adaptation learning journey and advocacy learning journey. Then we also have other shorter learning journeys like gender, Green Climate Fund, and CVCA. So under the adaptation learning journey, we have various modules, and actually one of the modules is around M&E. And I think this will be it can be very, very important for you to be able to go through and learn how and of course some of the tools that I also shared with you I also help you to sort of do your monitoring and evaluation when it comes to adaptation projects. And I advise you to first of all go through the presentation and interact with the tools and share. Actually, I had to, Yael told me to remove some of the slides because I didn't want to have so many slides, but there's so many tools that you can benefit from. So I advise you to interact with them. Then probably when we have the next cohort of the community-based adaptation learning journey, you can enroll. Yeah, it's all in the website, and it actually shows when these trainings happen and when they start. Yeah.
Sure, thank you. That's very helpful. I'll check that out. Yeah. Thanks.
I am curious about it sounds like this is a lot of work that you can do when it's quiet, when there's, the communities are stable. But what happens from your experience when there's a crisis, when there's an earthquake or a flooding, or, how does that shift? Like how do you go from kind of sustainable development to the humanitarian setting with all of this, with all of these tools?
Yeah, I think that's a very, very good question. And sometimes when disasters happen, for instance, in Southern Africa, we've had disasters happening like cyclones, and sometimes some of the tools may not be applicable. So some of these tools are actually quite applicable under circumstances where we don't have like emergencies and or climate hazards, which come as a result of for instance, cyclones, for instance, that come. So this is an emergency situation, and of course it calls for a humanitarian action, and that's where now the humanitarian people now come in. Of course, they have their own strategies on how to deal with this, but it's good you've said that some of these approaches are more applicable under sort of normal and circumstances whereby we do not have those extreme events happening, which sometimes may not communities may not have the time and the patience to implement this because there are other more pressing issues like dealing with emergencies or saving lives, which of course call for emergency response. Yeah.
Anyone else? Okay, so Obed, why don't you tell us just briefly about COP and again, some of what you hope to get out of it, what you're frustrated with, and then we'll just open it. We're not going to do breakouts, we're a small group, so let's open it to a small conversation about how we bring this back to our own communities and make it more practical. So Obed?
Yeah. The COP, it's quite tiring. First of all, I'm very tired. Yeah, I've been here for 1 week now, and I have 1 more week remaining. The COP started on the first day as a a historic announcement where loss and damage fund decision was adopted, and it has never happened in the history of COP. So people were happy, people clapped. We had pledges from various countries who have pledged to a tune of, I think, $600 to $700 million now to the loss and damage fund. And we have World Bank that is going to host the loss and damage fund. And so most of us are not happy with that because we think World Bank is bureaucratic. And when we talk about loss and damage, we're talking about emergencies. We're talking about communities receiving that money with the urgency that it deserves. And with the way World Bank is structured, there are a lot of bureaucracies. So when this was adopted, they gave World Bank some conditions, like ensuring that direct access to countries and communities, ensuring that there's active participation of civil society organizations, local communities, indigenous communities in the board. They're not part and parcel of the board, but in the discussions and deciding how this money is going to be used. And we hope that is going to be honored by World Bank, but we are a bit, but one of our main fears is how this money is going to be realized and how it's going to be replenished. The money that has been pledged is in the tune of millions, but the money that is required for loss and damage is in hundreds of billions. So this is one thing that we are still calling for: more money and a framework or a roadmap in how this money is going to be realized in a short term. Another thing is around adaptation, and of course we talked about adaptation, and adaptation is really key for developing countries. And one of the key issues in adaptation is the global goal on adaptation. The global goal on adaptation basically talks about enhancing resilience, reducing vulnerabilities, and it's under the Paris Agreement, Article 7. And the key challenge has been how to, as I said, monitor progress on adaptation. And countries have been trying to establish metrics and indicators on how we can monitor the progress of adaptation action. And the global goal on adaptation is going to address that. So here we are seeing a lot of back and forth between developing and developed countries and they're not making progress on how this framework is going to be realized, because what we are pushing for as developing countries is issues of finance. Because when talking about addressing adaptation, finance has to be there. And developing countries are really giving us problems in the negotiation room in terms of coming up with ambitious targets when it comes to means of implementation, which is the finance aspect. So this is one. And in COP26 in Glasgow, countries agreed to double adaptation finance by 2025. But since then, we haven't seen this happen, and there's no clear roadmap on how this money is going to be doubled. And that's why we are worried with the loss and damage fund. So here we are pushing for that roadmap to be established, and countries saying how they are going to actually double that finance. And even doubling that finance is just a drop in the ocean compared to the amount of money that is required for adaptation, because the recent adaptation gap report said that adaptation gap is in the tune of $164 billion to $366 billion per year, and doubling only helps us to reach 40 billion. So it's really a drop in the ocean, but we are pushing for more and hoping that we are going to get progress in terms of how these countries are going to double. That is, and adaptation is a national adaptation plans, countries making progress in finalizing the adaptation plans, but for them to be able to implement, they need the finance. So it still boils back to finance, including that finance really accessing those who need it at the local level, especially women and girls, women and local organizations at the local level. So those are some of the issues. Of course, there's a global stock take that is happening here, being completed here in terms of where we are in terms of achieving the targets that the Paris Agreement set, the temperature target, the finance target, and also the adaptation target. And we hope that this COP will come up with ambitious decisions to be able to help make countries do better in terms of adaptation and mitigation actions. Yeah.
Thank you. That's a lot, and it's frustrating to hear that things have not progressed as they should in the last few years. But thank you for being there and advocating for all of this. I hope it's a successful week ahead at COP. I want to open it up just to hear from all of you, even if you're not experts or working on climate. I want you to think about a community that you work with, or if you're not working with a community, your own community. And let's hear from you. What are the risks that you think they are facing with regards to climate change? What are the challenges within your context? And which tools or approaches that were mentioned by Obed did you find useful that you might want to use? Allison will put that question in the chat. And again, I'd love for you to turn on your cameras so we see your faces and we can have a few minutes of a discussion. So please feel free to unmute. So again, think about community. What are the risks? What are the challenges? And which tools or approaches did you find useful?
Hi, can I jump in?
Yes, hi.
Hi, this is Shoshana from Tikva Hadasha, Uganda. And there's challenges that are obvious, like the water. Like we have our dry seasons, they're getting more extreme and longer. And so we have to, we need to come up with some solutions for our bigger projects so that we can keep running well during the dry seasons. But then I feel like there's probably other effects that are not so obvious to me that I'm probably missing. That probably Obed, you might have some since you're from the same kind of region as us, you might have some insights as to what dangers we should look out for and what we can do for problems that we might have in the future that I'm just not aware of. Because there's certain problems that are super obvious. Then there's others that are less so.
Shoshana, can I ask, is it something that you've done? Have you had this conversation with the community members? Have you kind of done a needs assessment and heard from them about maybe potential issues?
So, when it comes to dealing with, lack of water during dry season, it's a lot of grumbling and hand wringing and, sympathy. But as far as being strategic and proactive, we need to be more forward thinking than what we have been. Yeah, because so far it's never been, the dry seasons have never been so bad where we couldn't handle it, like, but that doesn't mean that in the future it won't be.
Yeah. So maybe I guess Obed, a question from this is, what might be the first steps to take to really try to understand what the hidden risks are that are not so obvious? Obed, do you want to?
Yes. As I mentioned, one of the things that we need to do when we are working with communities to be able to understand the risks. And by doing this, there are tools that helps us to understand those risks. And one of those tools, as I mentioned, is the capacity, is community vulnerability assessments. So being able to understand those vulnerabilities and those risks really gives you a good picture on what vulnerabilities and capacities those communities really have or don't have. So the climate vulnerability and capacity analysis or assessment is basically helps you to do that gender sensitive analysis and be able to gather information on at the community level on key vulnerabilities and capacities. So you're able to identify actions or issues that communities are facing, and helps you to with community to design actions that are able to support those communities to increase the resilience. And of course, this will also, the assessment helps you to inform project the design when you're developing projects, emergency preparedness plans, and also issues of support, even issues of gender integration, ecosystems, and governance. So that assessment is very, very, very important, and because most of the time we go to the communities thinking that we know the challenges that they're facing. No, we do not. We have to do this assessment with them, not a top-down approach. Going down to them and getting to do this with them, understanding what are those challenges, what are those vulnerabilities, and what those capacities, then design with them solutions that work for them. Yeah, I think that's what I can say.
Thank you. Love to hear from others, either questions or again, thinking about communities you work with. Anyone? Obed, I think you just did such a good job covering all the information.
Either I did a good job or either they did not understand what I said, but I'll be happy to come back in case I'm required to unpack some of the specific areas you would like me to unpack. So just go through the presentation, talk to Yael, feel free to share my email with them, reach out to me. I'll be able to clarify some of those areas that probably you think you still have questions, because probably I might have gone very fast and probably you didn't. But also go to the CARE website, look at the materials there. They're free to view and even to download and benefit from those, because they're quite useful. Yeah.
I put in the chat, I believe, the self-assessment tool that you were discussing, which could be a good first step, but I will also send this in an email. And I just want to stress, this might be obvious, but even if you do work, you work with communities, but your focus is totally different from agriculture or climate, you're working on education or health or anything else, this is still relevant, because all communities, whether in the global south or global north, will be affected by the climate crisis. And so I think integrating this and budgeting for climate adaptation is really important, whether you do focus on climate or not. So with that, Sheldon, you unmuted, did you want to say anything?
Just one problem is when you get down to poorer areas like Lake Victoria region, and you have concepts like financial inclusion, and you find out that less than 1% of the people benefit because of that, because the scale of the institutions that are supposed to distributing the money and understanding the problem are too big, and it's not worth their while to get down to that lower level, the banking. So they give money to people who already have a certain minimum amount of money, and the poorest people don't have money, but they have resources. If they have access to land, they have access to their knowledge of the local environment, and they also have community solidarity, which has been based on their experiences for hundreds of years of dealing with change. Agriculture is always not necessarily climate change, but there's change every year. You don't have the same climatic conditions. So this is a big challenge. And the higher up you go, people are not going to, does it make sense to hire some foreign consultant that gets $1,000 a day to distribute something like $2,000? I've experienced this. And I'm sure that you understand that. So just like to raise this issue. The second issue is, because peasants are illiterate, doesn't mean they're more scientifically knowledgeable about their local conditions. Peasants can tell you 5 or 10, 20 varieties of a single crop like millet and explain the differences in how they operate. So illiteracy in this act as though the peasants are ignorant because they're illiterate. Literate meaning not knowledgeable in a Western language. And the way, if you want to eliminate illiteracy, functional literacy is the way to go, not to send them to schools which have curriculums which are not terribly adapted. They know the language, all you have to do is teach an alphabet, and in 5 or 6 weeks, you can get people illiterate. And that hasn't been used very much. So we spend millions of dollars to build schools which are overcrowded and have curriculums which really don't help people understand how to deal with their major problems or give them the tools.
I think those are very critical points you mentioned there, and especially the first point where you talked about big organizations. Really, there's now CARE is one of the champions of local leadership. It's a term that other people call localization, but we call it local leadership because we believe that leadership has to go to those communities that need it. And most of the time, power has been up here, big organizations, intermediaries, but now we want to shift the leadership to the local where it's required. That's why we call it local leadership. And we're now starting to have stringent rules to ensure that money is sent to local organizations, starting with local organizations. Because most of the time, money has been sent to intermediaries up here, and they are huge administrative and procurement and all those. Money is spent up there here, but doesn't. By the time it goes to the community, it's already finished. So even our donors are now giving us strict rules to say that, to define who are local partners. So money that goes directly, and this is something that you're going to hear more and more. And we want you, even within the organization, to start championing for it. If you are not doing it, so that we can get local organizations and have trust in them that they can be able to spend money in the right manner, and also give them that opportunity to do that. Otherwise, if we keep on doubting them, then when are they going to spend that money? Or when are because it's them who are facing the challenge, and they know the challenges they're facing. So the aspect of local leadership is really, really key, and CARE is really championing on that, and something that we would like you to support. And of course, the aspect of literacy is really, really important. And of course, giving communities the power and the knowledge to be able to engage. And for me, I will also look at it in a manner whereby even this policy discussion that we are having here, who are we talking, or who are we discussing or talking on behalf? It's on behalf of communities. But do they really know what we're talking about here? They don't. So why don't we bring them to these spaces to be able to also engage in a manner and articulate those issues in the language that they understand the best? And that's what also CARE stands for, being able to link local to global and bringing those local women, local pastoralists to these spaces so that they can also be able to champion for their issues. Yeah.
Also, to give knowledge that is not known at higher levels. All of a sudden we've learning that diversification of crops are better. We learned that that planting forests don't deal with the problem of forest fires, which are happening. And we're learning from indigenous populations that knew how to manage their forests. And we need to know their local knowledge. And there are people like you that are the connection that it's important that when you talk to the higher ups, but there are also interests at the higher ups which are against this, including many large consulting firms. This is a big business and they have interest, and also they don't have the knowledge and they're not used to operating at the scale that you have of living. The real question is, how do people live? How are they organized? How do they do things? And what are their skills? They have loads of skills, but we assume that you're starting with no skills, but they have skills. And I'm an advocate of going to local knowledge because yes, they know a lot more about the agri, especially if they've lived there for hundreds of years and they've had to adapt and they've survived. And we couldn't survive. We need all this extra fertilizer and this and that, and but how did they, how could you survive on, everybody uses $1.90 a day, that the poor, you can't buy a cup of coffee in any developed country with that. So people are wondering, it's because people have land, they grow their own food, which are not cash crops, and they actually eat it, and we don't even know about 20-40% of what they're eating. And they know the value, the nutritional value. So we really need to bring up the knowledge to the people who are making the policy in good faith, hopefully. That would be what we need to work on. And I'm glad that in Israel, a lot of young people are going at the local level and working with it, and they're learning from them. And we have in Israel technology that they could use. But they also have technology and methods that we could use. We have problems of flooding and drying up of rivers all over the Western world and all over the developed countries. So we can learn from each other. It isn't a one-way track.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sheldon. I think that's powerful. I don't want to add. I will not want to add. But I think you need to be here at the COP. We need that wisdom here. Yeah. So
well, this is my dream. My dream is to connect the people, and we need everybody because we need people at the top. If you just operate at local level, but we need advocates and intermediaries, you need local government, you need businessmen, you need all these people, and how can we integrate their potential contribution?
Partnership. Very important. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming.
I will end on that note, the positive note that we are hopefully doing good work already and need to continue working together. And Sheldon, maybe next year you can be at COP and be in touch if we can help you get there. So thank you, Obed. This was really interesting. Thanks to all who stayed along for an hour and a half. I appreciate it. Hopefully behind your cameras, you are still with us.
My wife is calling me to
thank
dinner.
you, everyone. Obed, good luck with your work, and thanks for all you're doing. And take care, everyone.
Thank you. I'm happy. Thank you. It was really awesome and exciting. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.